Good morning, I'm Nikki and I'm here today at the Udder House in South Kensington to launch the Giant Leap podcast in conversations with, and I'll be speaking to leading luminaries from the luxury and finance marketing sector, and we'll be finding out how the current landscape of social, technological, economic and political upheaval is affecting our industry today. Let's go inside and have a look.
Hi, my name is Michael Guyatt. I've been working in the digital industry for over 24 years.
Hello and welcome to the Giant Leap podcast in conversations with. And I'm Nikki and I'm speaking to Michael Guyatt from many different places, also from 111 Skin. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Michael Guyatt. So I have now been working basically in digital marketing for 24 years. I think I calculated it out as before I kind of came in here. That means I kind of started around the sort of like 2001 sort of period. So I guess it was relevant for the most part for being the dot-com bust. And I was one of the people sort of like at the back end trying to pick up the pieces. It seems like quite a strange thing now, but like at that time, sort of the e-commerce industry was basically a few people in kind of like the corner of an office. And a lot of people used to treat it with a lot of skepticism. So there were people around just saying the internet will never work. And, you know, that was 24 years ago is a long time, but it also doesn't seem that long when you've kind of lived through it. And I kind of spoke to a lot of gurus at the time, kind of like the Drayton Birds, the Andy Owens of the world, who were kind of really big kind of like copywriters. They were convinced nobody would be in buying mode when they were on their computers, but I don't think any of them could have really predicted kind of what would have happened. And for my career, I was very glad that they were wrong this time. So,
I, for one, remember not so much the start of the internet, but when everything started to go mobile. And I had a fashion brand at the time, and I remember us having the strategy discussions about like, do you think anyone will buy this stuff on a mobile phone?
Well, it was very sort of like interesting that sort of time because Google used to sort of like announce that every year was the year of mobile, and it must have been 7 times in a row. And eventually they were correct, but. There was a lot of development that was needed to be done on phones really to kind of make them sort of like useful. You know, moving from the sort of like the 1G to the 2G to up to 5G now. And they've become infinitely more sort of like useful, particularly for a marketer.
Absolutely. You mentioned you were picking up the pieces at the end of the dot-com boom. What exactly were you, which pieces were you picking up? What industry were you working in? What was your background there?
Yeah, so I guess at that sort of time I was working for a publishing company. So it was very easy to put information out on the internet and make it popular. But there always was this sort of like aching question of, well, how do you make any money out of it? And there were various thoughts and things that people were doing at that time. And what we ended up doing was putting things sort of like behind sort of like a subscription wall. And we used it as a tool to try and sell more sort of like print-based journals and things like that. So it became a benefit. So it was kind of like a prime for people who bought good old paper. It's one of those things that, you know, it still sort of like exists in sort of like some form today. But what we were essentially trying to do was take really kind of quite complex academic articles and précis them so they became manageable and interesting for the average person. One of the publications we used to manage was called Industrial Lubrication and Tribology. I don't know.
There's an audience for everything.
I know, absolutely. It was niche to say the least. I don't know if you've ever watched Have I Got News for You? Mm-hmm. They used to have a section at the end of towards the end of that show, which was like the obscure magazines, and Industrial Lubrication and Tribology actually made it into that session.
Excellent, that's the claim to fame.
Yeah, I don't think anybody could have guessed what was coming on that page. It's an amazingly complex area. But
so how do you get from that thing that I can't even say to skincare?
Yeah, so I mean, it was sort of like a little bit of a journey, really. So when I kind of came sort of like out of the sort of like publishing industry, I wanted to move where the information and the data was. So I think I saw quite quickly that, essentially digital marketing was going to be very closely associated to data. So I went to go work for one of the sort of like catalog firms. Sort of like very sort of like early on. So this was sort of like Otto UK. So, obviously a huge German sort of like company. They came in and bought a number of the sort of like the UK brands. So that was Freeman's, Grattan, Look Again, Kaleidoscope, and various sort of like other ones. And I guess what was sort of like interesting about that is that the catalogue era was really coming to an end. And it was kind of all based around the finance model. So the reason why they were able to charge the sort of like additional money that they could was it was a way of sort of like loaning money to people. So if you needed a washing machine and you didn't have the money in your account, the only way to do it was really to go to these catalogue companies that would give you a line of credit. But as we know, the banking industry fundamentally changed. Credit became a lot easier to sort of like access, and then people could become more discerning shoppers. And that was kind of one of the things that they were kind of really struggling with at that time. But the thing was that they were a very sort of like professional organization, and they knew a lot about customer segmentation. And a lot of the principles that I kind of learned there, I just kind of kept reapplying to sort of like every role that I kind of came into sort of thereafter. Because fundamentally, when you break businesses down, it's just about acquiring new customers and keeping them. And I think if everybody kind of kept it as simple as that, we wouldn't have such a large amount of noise in the industry.
Yeah. And in order to acquire those customers, know them and what they need.
Yeah.
So did you have a stint in fashion as well after all the
Absolutely,
catalogues and what happened there?
Yeah, so basically sort of like as I came out of the catalogue firms, I realised there was a bit of a gap in my knowledge, so I kind of moved to the agency side. So what the bit that I kind of realised out of that was it wasn't just important what you did, it was how you did it. So it was there was kind of a lot of tricks to media buying at that time. And there was a lot to that. So in the way that you would sort of like structure campaigns and sort of like get your messages sort of like out there and make sure you were appearing in the right place. So one of the things that I kind of learned from Drayton Bird was that above all else, above the creative, above the messaging, above everything, is targeting. So you just need to make sure you're in front of the right people, because if you can't, it doesn't matter what you say, you will never convince somebody to do it.
Yeah. But of course, the wealthier they get, the harder they are to target.
Indeed, they are. Yeah. So there's kind of a lot of data that's kind of like around there. A lot of it's sort of like inaccessible. So you've got to find ways of finding out or predictors of wealth, I guess. So you start looking at educations and backgrounds and the kind of like areas that people live. There was kind of like an interesting case at 111 Skin where I was doing some analysis and I started looking at postcodes and I just thought, do you know what, I'll just throw these into Google Maps just to try and understand a little bit more about our customers. So you get the sort of bird's eye view of the maps. And I became abundantly aware that what was in the back of people's gardens was a great predictor for how good the customers were. So there were some people with sort of like the standard swimming pools and tennis courts and and vineyard type sort of stuff. But there was one gentleman in sort of like New Jersey who had a golf hole in his back garden.
It's so funny you mentioned this because we did similar. I was at Bentley for a while and we were doing the digital content and we had to try and figure out whether people who were talking about the brand were qualified potential customers. And one way of our method of doing that was to see like how expensive the marble looked in the kitchen and what size topiary they had in the garden. And sometimes you could see their car fleet in the drive. So this is it does go a bit sort of from science to art, doesn't it? Yeah.
I mean, I think one of these sort of like classic examples of sort of like great sort of targeting was when sort of like Rolls-Royce sort of like stopped displaying at car shows and then went to sort of boating events. So when you were looking at the price of a several £1 million yacht, Rolls-Royce seems like a throwaway sort of purchase. And, with all the connotations that has, you're in front of the right audience, and it just is a great place for them to be. And it's a genius part of the marketing process.
Yeah. Let's talk about 111 Skin for a moment. What's I know you're not necessarily there anymore, but it's a very interesting case. What is the mission, the offer of 111 Skin to which audience?
Yeah, so I guess when it kind of came to sort of like 111 Skin, I'll just give you sort of like a little bit of a background on the company and the people who sort of like set it up, because I do find those kind of stories interesting. I think we'll probably come on to it later, but in terms of kind of what really kind of separates you out is your story. And I think those are the things that everybody really needs to start focusing on. But the 111 Skin brand, it was something that was developed over many years. So Yanis Alexandrides, who is the owner of sort of like 111 Skin, is a plastic surgeon. So he certainly a plastic surgeon of note. So he's triple board certified. He's sort of like a very clever guy, super guy to sort of like just hang around with. And basically what he was sort of like noticing was that when he was performing operations and sort of like using skincare products or trying to recommend them to his customers, he was finding they were really kind of quite harsh and causing sort of like rashes and sort of like things around basically open wounds. So he realized it could be done better, I guess. So a few years sort of like went by, and he just happened to be sat at dinner next to some space scientists, and they had this sort of like NAC kind of compound. Yeah, as you do. So, I don't know where this dinner was, but it was certainly important. And yeah, they wanted him to try and test a surgical sponge, but he wasn't particularly interested in that. He was interested in what the formulation sort of like was. So it was this NAC compound. He then added a couple of ingredients to it. So that's why it's called NACY2. So it's Yanis 2 ingredients, and those 2 ingredients basically recharge the NAC and just get it to recycle effectively, sort of like on the skin. So there was no flashy packaging, there was nothing sort of like that, and the formulation itself was just given away to Yanis's patients for free. And he didn't. I suppose he didn't really think too much about it, but the product was very much loved, sort of like from there on in. And people started coming back to him, just saying, I love seeing you, but I actually just want this product. So he started sort of like selling them on a very, very small scale. And I guess the story that I guess I believe, I think there's a few stories kind of kicking around. But apparently one of the head buyers from Harrods rang up Yanis's office and said, can you please tell me why one of my largest customers has stopped purchasing skincare with me? And there the story kind of goes. And he said, well, it's this product. And the people from Harrods came in and said that they could help him sell it. They set the price points and the market and gave them a shelf in sort of like Harrods. And they kind of grew and scaled the business from there, very much in sort of like a retail focused kind of way. And I think in terms of what the mission was, in terms of that. So if you look back to the very nature of the beginning of that genesis of the idea, it was really there to help people. So the kind of the strapline that kind of came around just because of the nature of Yanis's sort of like profession and the products that they had was surgically precise skincare, which I think is a very good description of kind of what they do. So they have specialist products for eyes. For at the time they had things for necks, face, and all manner of things. So I guess it comes from a genuine place of trying to help people fundamentally.
Amazing. So that brings us to sort of the current situation, and a lot about this podcast is to do with the way that wealth is changing, transferring from one audience to another, and the different behaviour that's causing, which is resulting in different products being needed. So one thing that I have to ask about is, of course, these days with there's so much talk about like gender fluidity and gender equality, and men don't have to be as macho anymore.
Very true.
So I was wondering, like, what percentage of the 111 Skin audience was men versus women, considering as well it's such a sort of scientific product?
indeed. So it was still a female-dominated market, I would say. So I guess we had many conversations around sort of like targeting men, and I've seen many of the brands that specifically target men, and you see them come and go. And I guess the fundamental reason for that, in my belief, is that men don't really buy these kind of like products. You just steal your girlfriends.
That is a campaign waiting to happen.
Yeah, so that's the evidence that I guess I saw. And when you kind of look at what we were doing, it was very much focused towards sort of like the female market. And I think you almost reach the men through the women in this sort of like case. But we did have male customers. That is definitely not to be denied. Some celebrities and things like that kind of came through. But yeah, I think it's one of those things that will continue to change sort of like over time. And the girlfriends will eventually be fed up with that and tell them that they have to go and buy their own. So
actually, I had one example of the opposite thing happening, because I had to do some research for a high-end skincare brand, and to do this, I canvassed lots of videos from social media that people had been posting, and in fact, I think it was the daughter of Lisa Bonet and. The guy with the big dreadlocks, what's his name? Lenny Kravitz.
Lenny Kravitz, of course.
Was saying that the skincare that she currently used was because it was in the shower of her boyfriend.
I mean, so Lenny Kravitz looks great, though. So
they all have amazing skin.
Indeed, they do. Yeah. So, he'd be a great brand ambassador for any sort of skincare company that was targeting men, most definitely.
Yeah. Wow. So it's a very particular product.
That's a good way of putting it.
Very particular product. Who's the target audience? How much does it cost?
So I guess if you were to look at the industry before a lot of these new entries sort of like came in, the kind of the pinnacle cream at that time was creme de la mer. So that kind of sits in around the sort of like £300 kind of price mark, depending on the size that you buy it, obviously. And if you look at kind of like 111 Skin, their premium product is double that price at least. So there is...
For like 50 mil?
For 50 mil, depending on the product. So the kind of the lead kind of serums and things, the ones that we were kind of talking about earlier, would be in the £250 to £270 price point, whereas the sort of like lead creams, certainly the Black Diamond collection, the 50 mils will kind of cost you in excess of £600.
Wow. Yeah. So who are these people who are these expensive pots of cream?
So I mean, who does it? So I used to do kind of a lot of sort of like customer analysis, and I looked at sort of like the lead sort of customer in that sort of space, and she was an American out in California, and she would spend roughly about £12,000 a year, or $14,000 to $15,000 in terms of her skincare. So I would kind of put it as hardcore skincare believers.
But why would you? Was there anything that they had in common about, like, why would they be such a hardcore skincare believer?
Yeah.
Is it that they tend to be public-facing people, their faces on show, or is it something else more deeply psychological?
I think that's sort of like a good point. I've never really thought about it in those kind of like terms, because I was more interested in the fact that they were ordering rather than sort of like why they were ordering to some degree. But yes, a lot of them were sort of like high profile. There were some celebrities and things that would kind of be in that sort of like mix, so very much public facing. The lady in particular that I'm thinking of, she was one of the C-suite people at one of the big industrial firms of all things. Was out in California.
So not necessarily a celebrity, but if you're a CEO, you're still having to be seen by thousands of people.
Absolutely.
And you still want to pluck a wrinkle here and there.
Yeah, we can all use a little help sometimes.
We can. Then what happened? So you were at 111 Skin, and now you're on a very intriguing
Yes.
Very exciting project. What can you tell us about it?
Unfortunately, I can't tell you all that much, so I can only talk in very, very general terms. But it's sort of like a very sort of like exciting project. It's in the skincare category. It's in the luxury segment. Once again, there is a science sort of like element to this sort of like product. It's been set up by a very sort of like intelligent group of people who all came together from various walks of life. And, you know, they've created sort of like a really amazing product. And, you know, we're very much looking forward to bringing it to market.
If I stay quiet, he might say more.
You can't get me this time, I'm afraid. But we can always do a part 2.
Oh, yes. Okay. Part 2 coming up in quarter 3. Okay. So are you still going to be in the marketing side then on this, or is it your own venture?
So I think the view for certainly the view that a lot of people have of businesses sort of like going forward is that they have to have a real sort of like D2C presence. So as sort of like all things with sort of like retailers at the moment, you know, people are squeezing margins kind of consistently sort of like all the time. And that kind of leads you back to having a good, strong D2C business. And if you look at how people are reaching people these days in terms of like these kind of like challenger brands, you know, they're not putting sort of like billboards everywhere or doing big TV campaigns. You know, they are using digital marketing to try and really influence these micro audiences.
Okay, well that's really interesting. I've got a question about that. So the social selling is highly effective, works really, really well, but seemingly a little bit unregulated, and some of the stuff that you might accidentally buy on Instagram isn't always the real thing.
Yeah.
So, but if you're going to be D2C and using digital marketing, like how are you going to navigate that? You know, how do you, I suppose, keep the trust or differentiate yourself from those other offerings?
Indeed, yeah. So, I mean, it's a very, very busy place, but I think it kind of comes to something I alluded to sort of like earlier. It's all about the content and the story. And if your content is credible, you can find a way to sell it and stand out in those kind of spaces. The hardest thing to do is try to launch a brand in that space with zero credibility. So having the sort of like right people sort of like supporting it, which in this case we certainly do, the celebrity ties and various other sort of like things will all be techniques that will help us to kind of succeed in this market.
Let's talk about reviews for a moment.
Indeed, yeah.
They are a slippery fish for a luxury brand.
Indeed, yeah.
Especially if that luxury brand is getting into the hands of maybe not quite the target market, and then they have a different experience. It's really complicated kind of place to be, but it is one way of building trust.
Indeed it is, yeah.
and it is a form of peer network social proof, which we know is incredibly important for these audiences. What will be your stance on reviews?
Reviews, you know, I think they're very important in terms of sort of like that element of trust. So kind of like as you're kind of going through your story, which is, I kind of see it very much as the product page, you basically make a number of promises sort of like at the beginning so that people will care about. So that's your big headline. This is why we're different. This is why you should be sort of like engaging and buying this sort of like product. And then sort of like as you go through those elements, you've really got to get to the point of like, why should I believe you? So you need to have levels of credibility there. And that's where kind of things like brand ambassadors and all of those kind of pieces really kind of come in to reinforce that messaging of going, yes, you should believe all these claims because I have these long list of qualifications and blah, blah, blah. And then the next part of that is reviews. So I think skincare, it's one of those sort of like elements where you kind of really want to see it on people's skin. And there's a huge variety of sort of like skin types and things like that. So they become very useful tools. And I think what I'm always keen on is just, you know, not just acquiring a customer, but keeping them. So sort of like giving them the information up front. This product might not be for you, but we've got this other one over here, which is perfect for you. So you need to make sure that you're tunneling people in the right direction. And the sort of like reviews that we're planning on using on our website are video, text, before, afters, stacked full of all of those things. And within it, you do want to be sort of like brand conscious. If you're sort of like selling a luxury brand, some people might not be on brand, but it kind of comes down to the quality of their content.
I mean, I guess skincare is such a personal experience. Everybody experiences it differently, and so I guess you need to see those reviews from lots of different kinds of people as well, with different kinds of skin. And but I've been hearing a lot from the skincare space as well about personalisation.
Yeah,
personalised skincare, DNA related skincare. How what's your stance on it? Do you think it's a genuine disruption, valuable disruption, or is it a fad?
I think some of those things are still yet to be sort of like proved out. So I think people should approach those with a lot of skepticism to some degree. In terms of what you're talking about, really, I think the person I've been most impressed by is Get Harley. So I don't know if you're sort of like familiar with this sort of like platform, but they raised 50 million relatively recently. And the story of this lady was that, it was kind of during that kind of COVID period, and she was trying to access a dermatologist. And the trouble that she was having was that she just couldn't. It was COVID, right? So she managed to sort of like set up a business where she had all of these experts that had all of this sort of like downtime, and created a business where you would pay for a session, essentially. And then that doctor would have a list of sort of like recommendations, and these are all genuine recommendations coming from dermatologists of products they use and sort of like recommend. And when the customer sort of like goes through this very extensive sort of like 25 to 30 minute sort of like process, they kind of come out with a very sort of like tailored view and a personal view, because they're on there with a real person. I think one of the things I'm really kind of keen about is to try and make sure that we kind of get this level of connection with people, because I feel like people in the modern day are sort of like breaking apart to some degree. People's social circles are becoming smaller by the year, and effectively that sort of like connection will be important. You can go an entire day, you can get on buses, you can go to supermarkets, and you don't need to talk to anyone. And I think this level of personalization is a really good idea. So having these doctors there and a person and a face that speaks to you, especially when you have problems, is inherently sort of like valuable. And the kind of cute things that she kind of did was that on this box she got all of the normal branding sort of like appearing, but she was just sat in the house sort of like posting these things out as you do when you're a startup. And the box said, this is a personalized subscription for, and she would just write the name on in sort of like a white pen. And, it's such a simple idea, but it's that kind of real personalization that kind of really they kind of focus on. So I think it's going to be an increasingly sort of like interesting area, particularly for brands like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also thinking about your whole career journey where you started out in... essentially, it was like digital content before digital content really existed, charging people for really in-depth reports, and then content's gone sort of more style than substance, very, very simple, everything free, beautiful, car porn, fashion stuff, But it seems to be coming down the other side now to this sort of like content that you'll pay for again. Yeah. And all the algorithms seem to be rewarding deep, very engaging content, and you must be feeling a bit like, I know, I said so like 30 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. It's sort of like an interesting ride, and how things kind of go out of fashion and come back into fashion. But even back in the sort of really early days, it's when you were kind of looking at things like SEO, everybody was focused on how the algorithm changed and what they needed to do to kind of get in front of it. But if you just step back and look at it, it was just a content strategy. So when Google came out, their mission wasn't to make people rich; it was to organize the world's information. And the content strategy is absolutely imperative to that. So if you start focusing,
central tenet of any content strategy for the last 10 years has been put the customer first, like let them see themselves in the story. But now this skincare, it seems to be allowing them to do that with actual products.
Yeah. Yeah, so definitely. So yeah, it's sort of like an interesting area. I don't think I have all the answers on that one.
Audience first.
Yeah.
Where do you think everything's all going now? I mean, AI is here. The next wave of AI is on the cusp.
Yeah.
How is that going to affect your industry, skincare in particular, or maybe just the way that luxury audiences behave?
Yeah, I think in many senses nobody can really predict what AI is going to do. So if we had better ideas, we probably would have implemented them already. But AI has been sort of like in the digital industry for a long time. So all of the algorithms and things that have been driving these kind of things. And I remember being in meetings with Facebook many years ago, talking about how they were really focusing on AI being the thing, and it was fundamentally changing their advertising engine that they were kind of doing. They hit some inherent problems, which I always thought were interesting, because
which problems?
So if you kind of look at it, the things that AI will do, a human necessarily wouldn't. And is the fact that something's working the most important, or is it why it's working? So one of the engineers at Facebook apparently had this conversation. I can't guarantee it for sure, but he was working with a gambling client, and they kind of plugged all of these AI algorithms into their targeting, and lo and behold, their CPAs reduced and things were going great. And what they didn't sort of like realize at that time was that the algorithm was targeting very vulnerable gamblers.
Right.
Who were on a knife's edge every day, trying not to gamble, and then they were targeting them relentlessly until they broke. And if you kind of think about that from a very base sort of point of view, the why is kind of important.
Yeah, the why is kind of important there. Sometimes a bit more tricky to figure out there.
It certainly is. I mean, trying to get anybody, even when you're in a conversation with them on one-on-one, do you really know why everybody's acting the way that they are? Why do people buy the cars that they buy? That's a very kind of complex story in and of itself, especially at big purchases like that.
Yeah. The 5 whys, the coaching theory.
Right.
So if you just ask why 5 times, you usually get...
Maybe.
So I'm just going to do that to you now.
Let's give it a go.
So, no, I'm not going to put you on the spot. So we've talked about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Your career goes back a really long way. It's squiggled through lots of different industries, skincare, and now a new exciting project. Thinking about the audience of this podcast, Luxury Marketers, and all of the things that we've discussed, what would you say is the key takeout that you'd like to leave them with?
Yeah, I think my sort of like real focus is at the moment is that there's been different ages that I would say that I've kind of gone through with sort of like digital marketing, because it was a very immature industry when I kind of started. And there were a few gurus, but there were no experts. And I think kind of like what happened was that everybody kind of got focused on CPAs and really kind of detailed stuff, and nobody was sort of like stepping back and looking at the whole picture. And as we sort of like move forward, I think a lot of the measurements and things that we look at on a day-to-day basis are going to be more brand related. So it's going to be looking at those kind of content pieces and those story pieces and kind of all of those elements that kind of come down. And the way that we measure is going to change. And that is important because we can't keep going the way that we are, particularly in kind of like luxury markets. Yeah. So that is probably the biggest takeaway I would have.
So don't just focus on the numbers. Don't forget the golf hole.
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really great conversation. This has been the Giant Leap podcast in Conversations With, and I've been talking to Michael Guyatt.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you.